We're back in business, folks. So in 2010, Northfield Mountain, their reservoir, since they suck up the life and the sludge off of the river, all the silt comes up and ends up in their 4 billion gallon reservoir. And as far as I know, they have never had a successful sort of cleaning out of their reservoir. But in 2010, on May 1st, they tried to dump the silt out of their reservoir, and their mile-long tubes got just slumped with feet full of muck. We're talking about tubes that are big enough for a bus to go up one and the other. There are 2 different tubes, so they can actually generate and pull at the same time. And there are 4 generators up top. Their whole operation went haywire. And they were supposed to be out for, I think the outage was a week or 2. You know, this was all planned with FERC and ISO New England. And all of a sudden, they're not generating, and nobody knows it. And they turned around and they started dumping the sludge directly into the Connecticut River. I think it was like, I did that math at some point. It was like 30 dump truck loads a day directly into the river for 90 days straight. I can't remember the amount of that amount before they were caught. And the reason they were caught is because I used to work there, and I snuck up and took a picture of the reservoir because I knew something was wrong. Something was drastically wrong. And the other bizarro thing that happened that year was all of a sudden Northfield is not operating. They're not sucking the river backwards. As I said, we're talking about maybe a third of the year. Their suction can literally pull a river when it's not like full, you know, it's not at its fullest during the year, but sort of middle to low points about a third of the year. They can pull it back. They literally pull it back at 15,000 cubic feet per second for at least 3 miles. So if anybody's interested, anybody knows the French King Bridge, you ever been up the French King Bridge, or you've ever seen the French King Rock and up to Northfield, well, that's about a mile down. And then you go around the corner for another 2 miles, and that goes by the Turners Falls Airport, and there's a whole, that river is going backwards. That river is getting sucked backwards. So all of a sudden, this suction and pummeling from Northfield Mountain, this massive machine, and that's all it is, it's an electric machine that uses way more energy than it ever is going to put back. Literally a third, it dumps back a third less energy. It sucks up a third more than it ever puts back in. All of a sudden that's gone. And you look at the fish numbers that year, and they went up 430%. The fish passage at Turners Falls has always been lousy, and I'll get back to that. I'm going to have to jump back to that because I always do. 430% above 2009 numbers. A full 800% above the entire decade from around 1999 to 2010, 800% above those numbers. And the interesting thing about that decade leading up to this, to the only time that Northfield was out, and it was out for 6 months, the only time it was out, and that decade of all those low fish numbers, they were like 1,500, 1% passage at Turners Falls. That was a decade that energy deregulation took root in Massachusetts. That was then when they started to just unleash the power companies and the companies to do what they wanted on the river. So we don't have any science other than that 1 year, just a fluke industrial mess that they made themselves, and you have 6 months or more, half a year. Nobody in New England, sorry ISO, but we weren't living by candlelight. And if it went out right now, if it went out today, if it went out tomorrow, it was out for 6 months, we would not know the difference. That is sort of the power of this machine that never should have been put in place. My position on it is, when you look back to Holyoke Company v. Lyman Supreme Court decision, it was illegal from day one. You're supposed to have protections for those fish upstream and downstream on the Connecticut River. We are now approaching a brand new license. I'm a journalist. I'm proud to be a journalist, and I want everybody to know I am a big supporter of libraries. I'm jumping around here. But I'm also a big supporter of journalism, free press. We seem to be sort of leaving our community media in the dust, and something like this puts democracy in jeopardy. And something like having a foreign venture capital firm, which is literally an arm of the Treasury Board of Canada, by the way, public sector pension investments, own and have free license to run 20 miles of a 410-mile ecosystem at this point, when we should be restoring ecosystems and rivers in the face of climate. I think that is a threat to democracy. I think that is a threat to future generations. The fact that we are not being able to use the river does not feed us anymore. And I think that's a little opportunity for me to make another point, which is about how we blew it and 50 years ago, meaning we being the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, National Marine Fisheries, Mass Division of Fish and Wildlife, and all the protective agencies. The Connecticut River used to be called, through the 1960s, 50s, 60s, it was known fondly as the nation's best landscaped sewer. And as you've been hearing here, I would question that in Massachusetts, it remains the deadliest, best landscape sewer in the nation. And who was responsible for that? Fish and Wildlife Service, National Marine Fisheries, Mass Division of Fish and Wildlife, Mass Department of Environmental Protection. So we're gonna really talk about my section of the river and how they screwed it. Pardon the library, how they screwed it. This is going back to 1967. We had fish passage at Holyoke beginning in 1955. They finally found a way to come into line with Holyoke Company v. Lyman, and they had a very clunky system. And in 1955, they passed the first 5,000 American shad upstream. So you reconnected from mile 86, where the Holyoke Dam is, right up to the base of Turner's Falls Dam, up to mile 122. So that was done. By the mid-70s, hundreds of thousands of American shad were being passed upstream in Holyoke. And this is what made me fall in love with the river itself. Going to those lifts and watching. 1992, 720,000 American shad passed through that lift. In the 80s, there was a year, 86, I think, 640,000 blueback herring were mixed in with them, along with a bunch of sea lampreys and other stuff. But it was a river coming into its own. The problem was that they never did the right thing at Northfield, and they never did the right thing at Turner's Falls Dam. And so here's how it happened. In 1967, what is today's U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and National Marine Fisheries Service, the 4 states, Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Connecticut, all their fisheries directors got together and said, we're going to restore the Connecticut River fish runs, right? And they got together and they actually signed a legal agreement called the 1967 Statement of Intent for a Cooperative Fishery Restoration Program for the Connecticut River Basin. And so it was a legal U.S. And states regional effort. And the following statement shall constitute the official intent of the above named states and federal agencies. And here, these are just some excerpts. Objectives. The objectives of this program are to realize the full potential of the fishery resources of the river, including both anadromous, migratory, and resident species. The intent of this program is to provide the public with high quality sports fishing opportunities. Okay, the Bureau of Sports Fisheries, which is U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service today. They're one and the same. In a highly urbanized area, so we're talking about Hartford, Springfield, Brattleboro, up to Bellows Falls and above. The intent of this program, okay, high quality sports fishing opportunities in a highly urbanized area, as well as to provide for the long-term needs of the population for seafood. The seafood is American shad, which how many of you had shad this year for, you have to go down to Connecticut where there is still commercial fishing for shad because we don't have enough up here to do that, but we could have. So here we go, anadromous fish, and this is how they were looking at this. American shad, Alosis apodicima. Historically, the Connecticut River supported shad runs as far upstream as Bellows Falls in Vermont, which lies in the river between Vermont and New Hampshire, approximately 35 miles north of the Massachusetts border. Nobody knows the exact magnitude of the historic runs. It's probably would not be practical to restore the run to its historical numbers, but an evaluation of present spawning and nursery areas as far north as Bellows Falls indicates that a run of up to 2 million fish could be realized. The 2 million figure is based on the production of, and these are other numbers, but we're talking about a run of 2 million fish. And then here's when they break it down even further. And this is all legal agreement. A run of 2 million shad would require passage facilities for 1 million fish at Holyoke. That's what we were looking at. 850,000 at Turner's Falls and 750,000 at Vernon. We got to 720 at Holyoke once. The best we ever did at Turner's Falls was 60. Some years it was 1,500. It was less than 1% some years, okay. So, and then they talk about harvesting fish, and we could have an annual harvest of 100,000 shad above Hartford, 50,000 shad above Holyoke, 42,500 above Turner's Falls, and 37,500 above Vernon. So harvest means either recreational fisheries or commercial fisheries. And there are still commercial fisheries that catch shad. And if you go down the lower Connecticut River, you can have a nice shad. Rocky Hill, Connecticut, way down at the mouth, Old Saybrook, terrific, wonderful eating, bony fish. You have to know how to prepare it, but it fed people. This was their mandate in 1967. Then you go to, they stuck this other fish in here that had been gone since 1809 at the very southern edge of the territory that it had ever colonized. This is a cold water species. The magnitude of the original salmon run, they don't know, but it used to go as far as Beecher's Falls, Canada. And it was written about, there were salmon here, no doubt about it, during the colonial times. Up to 1798, there was a salmon run on the Connecticut River. It was a beautiful fish. It was a small part, but a regular part, going back into the clouds of history. It came here, but not so far to the clouds of history, which is the interesting part of this. So anyway, what they decided was that they could have a run at the river's mouth of 38,000 salmon. Now, where are they going to get them from? They weren't any. So how do you start? So you build $1 million hatcheries up in White River and down in Massachusetts and down in Connecticut. And you take hybrid fish from living runs up in the Maritimes or in Maine rivers. And you start to genetically sort of hybridize these fish in fish hatcheries, which are essentially the zoos of living rivers. They're not, they take the place of ecosystems and living systems. And they're great for industry. They hide what's not here. And so they decided that that's the route they were going to go. And let's see. And here's some of the kickers at the end of this about what they said. It's also, they talk about resident species. In addition to establishing and maintaining runs of anadromous fishes, we intend to maintain and enhance various resident species found throughout the basin. Okay, that's great. Here's one interesting little side note. 1967, based on the present fragmentary data available on the Northfield Pump Storage Project, it appears that this project poses definite limitations to an anadromous fish restoration program. These limitations involve the physical loss of eggs, larvae, and young fish of both anadromous and resident species, and an orientation problem. We've all had orientation. That means upstream and down. They don't know where they are. For both upstream and downstream migrants attributed to pumping large volumes of water, essentially pumping 15,000-foot mansions per second up into a reservoir while the fish are trying to migrate. So studies designed to minimize the potential adverse effects to fishery resources should be undertaken in development of the design for the Northfield Mountain Pump Storage Project. In related studies, fish screens, barriers, and deflectors and flow regime must be thoroughly investigated. Somehow they never were. Somehow, within 2 years, this program got taken over by salmon mania, by people that like to have nice fishing outfits and fly fish, and they were going to bring back this trophy fish, which was not real, which was virtually extinct on the river. They were going to bring there, so that's where all the emphasis went. That's where the money went, right? They did get fish passage fixed at Holyoke, but what they built up at Turner's Falls was an industrial dream. What they did was they took the design for Pacific Coast salmon on the massive Columbia River, where salmon, different various types of salmon run up the Columbia River, massive river, right? Big. So they took this ice harbor, and I forget the names of what the fish ladder designs were, but they thought, well, we'll just scale this down, because they were also, American shad had been transplanted from the Atlantic to the Columbia River, to the Pacific Basin, and the shad were doing well in the Columbia River, hugely well. So they decided, we'll just take that design and make it smaller on the Connecticut River. So what you ended up with, and this is the fault of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Mass Division of Fish and Wildlife Service, National Marine Fisheries, they decided, and the Commonwealth, they decided to let the power company have the river. They would divert all the upstream running American shad, and Holyoke was passing shad to beat the band before Northfield came online. And these fisheries facilities at Turner's got finished in 1980. They agreed to this. They left the Connecticut River empty. Every fish, blueback herring, American shad, the 50 salmon that we used to have. And I have to raise my hand, because I spent about 5 years writing, and I want to take credit for actually killing the Atlantic salmon program on the Connecticut River. Is probably the thing that I'm most proud of, and people don't even understand what it is. Every fish that was trying to move up into northern Massachusetts, Vermont, and New Hampshire, they were entitled to their fish, because when the proposed fisheries become a reality, the 4 states involved will cooperate to establish regulations that will maintain the fisheries, as well as assure that each state receives its just share of the fishery harvest. Those fish, every one of them got turned into the Turner's Falls Canal, and maybe 1 in 10 ever made it out the other side. Nobody ever knew whether. There were 3 ways you went up. You went up there's a little place called Cabot Station in the 3 mile, what I call the dead reach below Turner's Falls Dam, that's left just scoured clean or empty or pummeled by Northfield's either pumping or water release. So that can be left totally empty. I think they have, I forget the number, maybe 1,000 cubic feet is sort of dribbled down there. But there's 2 ways you can go up. So the first place the fish encounter are the Turner's Falls Canal. The water that attracts them is coming out of the canal. So they built a fish ladder there. That fish, the fish couldn't get up. Okay, they couldn't get up there. And if they chose, if there was more water in the river and there was more water, there was another ladder right at the base of Turner's Falls Dam. And if the levels were right that day, some more fish could get in there, right? Some more shad, but then they'd have to go up this other tremendous ladder, and then they'd be put in the canal again, this totally chaotic industrial habitat. And then they'd have to pass through another little ladder to get up beyond the dam to start to head up to Vermont, New Hampshire. It was a disaster from day one. It was a disaster from 1980 on, and they never admitted their mistake. And every year they would have salmon at the Holyoke Dam and salmon in the schools for the kids. And I watched this, and then through the 90s, all of a sudden, there are no salmon because this was kind of a stupid idea in the first place. And the shad numbers just keep going down, and nobody is paying attention to what the original restoration was about. And right concurrent with the biggest shad run that there ever was on the Connecticut River, that 720,000 that passed Holyoke, a woman who was, I think she's still maybe semi-retired, Catherine Carlson, did her UMass thesis on in archaeology at UMass. And it was a study of the archaeology and the history of salmon on the Connecticut River. I'm going to get rid of these. Catherine Carlson's very elegant, very brave stand just threw to light the fact that there was something called the Little Ice Age in New England and Northern Europe. Started, I think, if I have the dates right, around 1300, 1200, lasted about 500 into the early 1800s. And it is historically known through records, where we have written histories from Europe and here beginning in the 30s and 40s. There were very, very cold years where there would be August frosts, and it was all caused by a climatic aberration, now known as the Little Ice Age. And what happened at that point was that there were these cold water years in the Atlantic that came south, and salmon, being opportunists, they found this new cold river to go up. So they colonized at the very southern, they colonized a new edge to where they were. So literally, she went back through the archaeology of southern New England up to northern New England, and they could never find any salmon bones anywhere. And there also was not a very highly established Native American sort of ritualized salmon sort of understanding. You don't have what you have for salmon indigenous people, say, on the West Coast. I mean, there were some, clearly, but not here. So Carlson's thesis turned around and said, why would you expect a salmon program to work on the Connecticut River? Because by the time the last dams were coming in for the Industrial Revolution, the Little Ice Age was moving off, so it happened concurrently. But those salmon were already going. They were not the lifeblood of the Connecticut. There's no doubt that they were here, but 1809 they were gone. It's literally part of my internet address. I hate to say this, I have to write it all the time, but 1809 is included. It's the year Darwin was born and the year the last run of salmon ever came up the Connecticut River. To turn around in 1967 and say, this is what we're going to do. We're going to restore shad first, right? Shad, restorable, still here, all the way up and down the coast, from the St. John's to in Nova Scotia to the St. John's in Florida. We're right in their wheelhouse. Perfect idea. We're going to do salmon. Within 2 years, it became the Connecticut River Atlantic Salmon Commission. Well, they didn't change the name of that, but we still have a Connecticut River Atlantic Salmon Commission on the Connecticut River. They blew it 49 years ago, and the other thing they did, the biggest crime, I think, is not protecting those fish at Northfield. And what we're looking at today, and I think I'm going to stop talking and let you guys ask me questions, but I have been a stakeholder and an intervener in the relicensing of Northfield Mountain Turner's Falls since 2012. I've literally intervened. I intervened on the part of short-nosed sturgeon when First Light PSP came in, bought up these facilities in 2016, turned around in 2018, December 20th, on the eve of a government shutdown, when U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and National Marine Fisheries are going to be offline for 2 months, they turn around and re-register these facilities with the state of Delaware as limited liability companies. So you have a Canadian $20 billion corporation, and your figures are a little bit wrong, guys. You're a little bit behind that. They passed 20 billion this year. They reported in June, this is PSP Investments, an arm of the Treasury Board of Canada, owners of First Light, Delaware LLCs, 18% increase in profits this June on their June things. So I'm trying to follow that out to where I was. Anybody want to help me?
Current state of relicensing.
Current state of, thank you. All right, so I'm an intervener. I've been doing this for just about a decade. Their license expired virtually 3.5 years ago at Northfield. They're playing with house money. They've been dragging this out as long as they possibly can. They've not put a shovel in the ground because they have to create new fish passages. Legally, they are required to create new fish passages. Why aren't they? Because nobody holds their feet to the fire. We don't have a watchdog on the Connecticut River. We have more of a lapdog. On the Hudson River, they fought back. Storm King Mountain was going to become a pump storage station, virtually at the same time that Northfield was proposed on the Hudson River. They fought it right through 1980, gave rise to Hudson River Keeper, who now has like 350 organizations across the globe. They go in, they have lawyers, they say, we go to court, we investigate, we prosecute. On the Connecticut River, we have a 69-year-old organization without a single lawyer, never goes to court, never spoke against this plan. I saw Andy Fisk a year and a couple months ago launch a kayak, a Chamber of Commerce kayak recreation, sort of just a little junket from virtually next to the mouth of Northfield Mountain, along with Kathleen Theoharides, the current commissioner, the energy, Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs, and some of our local representatives, and nobody said a word about the death machine that they were launching in front of. So I've been a stakeholder, I've gone to all the meetings, but I'm the only person that, first of all, publishes what's going on because I didn't sign the company's confidentiality agreement. Everybody else did. Mass DEP, Mass Fish and Wildlife, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, National Marine Fisheries Service. They have been meeting secretly, and we're finally getting to the end game here. There's a meeting scheduled for December 2nd, which may be the final meeting where the sausage is going to be made out of the public's eye. The only thing that I know that has been proposed, and it's only been proposed by the power company, the only mitigation that's been proposed at Northfield Mountain, the fish eating, energy wasting, climate scorching machinery, is a barrier net temporarily stretched out just above the mouth of Northfield Mountain. The mesh on that net is going to be 3/4 inch mesh, right? This is what they propose. They're not even going to, it's not even going to be permanently anchored in the river. It's going to be put in there, taken out. 3/4 inch. Well, if you've, anybody ever had sardines or pickled herring? You know, I wanted to stop and get a little tin of this stuff to bring down with you. That is exactly what juvenile American shad look like. That's what juvenile blueback herring look like. That will be coming down the river exactly in those times when First Light Canada, Delaware, wants to do this tiny bit of mitigation, which is actually being put there so that American eels do not head downstream and directly up into the pipes of Northfield, because for some biological reason they have a proclivity to do that. But everything else. So picture your little pickled herring, your little tiny juvenile shad, a head's about this big. Picture all their eggs, picture all their larvae after they're done spawning. They get up into that pool, and the new goal is to pass almost 400,000 shad upstream, because Vermont, New Hampshire, and northern Massachusetts, they have never seen their share of anything in this Connecticut River Atlantic Salmon Commission, which was the New England Cooperative Fisheries Agreement, still in business today under a salmon label. How many salmon passed the Holyoke Dam this year? They're gone. Thank you. I'm proud of it. They were never here. I mean, they were just gone, and that's what we spent all this time doing. So what the proposal is to leave the hideous, ugly, wasteful mouth of this thing wide open during downstream migration season. And it is the responsibility of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and National Marine Fisheries Service. These are federal trust fish on the public's river. They are supposed to protect this. They failed 49 years ago. I think they're getting ready to fail again. And I've been at this, been writing about the Connecticut River for 25 years. I don't know if anybody used to read Sanctuary magazine. My last big piece was Turner's Falls Turnaround. My favorite piece, which is not here, but I wrote, I can't remember when, but it appeared in the Worcester Telegram and the Burlington Free Press, and the Middletown News, was called How to Keep a Dead Fish Alive. And that really sort of helped the salmon program ultimately see its end. I actually did a few op-eds, and Wendy Weber, who is the regional director of U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Region 5. It's called the Appalachian Region. It's in U.S. Fish and Wildlife headquarters are in Hadley, right here, locally. 13 states responsible for. We are in the Esso Conti U.S. Fish and Wildlife, National Fish and Wildlife Refuge. Fish and wildlife. Only 2 refuges in the country have fish in their name. Are they going to step up? That's the question. December 2nd is when they're meeting next. They're hoping, and this is all being led by First Light. First Light is wagging the dog here. Our federal and state agencies, and Massachusetts bears a lot of responsibility of this. And so do we as citizens, by the way, in this time of climate change, when you should be fixing ecosystems. Per capita, we shouldn't ignore this. We are per capita the biggest consumers of energy on the planet in this country. And Massachusetts is the biggest consumer of energy in New England. And this is sort of beside the point, but if you've ever walked through MIT, in the middle of it, I feel the earth shaking under it. I mean, technology is killing the planet, and our hunger to use electricity and to ignore what's under our feet is criminal. I'm here because I don't have anywhere to go. I've been at this so long that I am not prepared to leave anything on the table. I probably still have a little bit more noise to make before they do this. My heart's already broken for this river. It's been broken for a long time. But I'm going to make sure people remember what happened, okay? There's still some chance that they could do the right thing. But I think that's the province of journalism. That's a province of freedom of the press. And like I said, it's part of democracy. If we don't leave a living ecosystem for those that come after us, there is no democracy. You have an industry just controlling our water. Like I said, Eversource is a water company. Eversource is Columbia Gas. Eversource is all sorts of things. And Eversource is the biggest friend of the Connecticut River Watershed Council. They have been there hand in hand in pocket since they were Northeast Utilities, Wamico. They still sponsor, I don't know how much they pay for the greenwashing, 50,000. You hear every year about the source to sea cleanup. We spent 24 days, 2 hours on a Saturday, and we have this clanging how wonderful it is. We've saved the river every year, right? Here's our pile of trash. Maybe some of you are participated. Nothing wrong with that. We found a tire, we took it out of the river. We have had 18,000 days of no cleanup at Northfield Mountain, of fish kill. Can you imagine the mountain of fish if they ever had taken any time to say this thing kills? Or if National Marine Fisheries or U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, who I intend to hold liable for all of this, had done something or admitted that they made a mistake in the middle of their salmon program and said, listen, we made a mistake. We're going to do the studies, and we're going to have all this ready so that this cannot happen for another 50 years. First Light, PSP, they want a 50-year license to run this river. I think I'm just going to say thanks for listening. I'm happy to take questions. There's a whole bunch of writing in the back of the room for the few folks in the audience, and there's some great posters. And I just want to hold up this one thing. I'm also proud of this. This is short-nosed stout. It's the federal agencies were refusing to talk about the Connecticut River's only federally endangered migratory fish, this ancient, 100-million-year-old species that tries to spawn every year at a place called the Rock Dam, which is literally a natural dam in the Connecticut River, starved by the canal system, the canal fish passage they set up, and the suck and surge flows at Northfield Mountain. Very rarely do they get to spawn, and this has been their natural spawning site for years and years. So I am still friends with a guy named Dr. Boyd Kennard, who did a lot of this science on sturgeon. And I said, Boyd, they're not talking about it. I'm going to get you a beer to do. So I came up with the brand Short-Nosed Stout. It sold pretty well for a year or two. It was a big hit. And then all of a sudden, the Watershed Council, who I worked and walked out of twice there, by the way, over the years, they stepped in and they were collecting money in the name of the sturgeon, and they never did anything for the fish. So I just had to step away. So this is an empty bottle, like my heart, about this beer brand. And this is also one more piece. Boyd Kennard actually turned around and he published a book about short-nosed sturgeon. It's called Life History and Behavior of Connecticut River Short-Nosed and Other Sturgeons. World Sturgeon Society published it. They're in Germany. They're sort of the think tank of all things sturgeon. This book was embargoed when it came out. I think it was 2012. Because Boyd Kennard mentioned in one of his studies, and he was working for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service at the time most of these studies were done. He was the chief principal investigator, and then the Conti lab, which is a fish lab, which is literally yards away from the Rock Dam, right? This fabulous, sort of in-ground study area that's in situ, sort of place where you can study. All of a sudden, it became the province of the U.S. Geological Service while Dr. Kennard was still doing his science there. And when he was ready to publish this after retiring, I don't know how many years he put in, the USGS, U.S. Geological Survey said, no, we can't, we have editorial problems with this book. And this book was edited by some of the world-class sturgeon experts, right? And the reason it appears very clear to me is because he mentioned that river regulation by the companies is causing spawning failure at Turner's Falls Rock Dam. Just a couple of little words. And they kept this book embargoed, I think, from February to June. And I finally wrote the piece in the Daily Hampshire Gazette there's about 10 different scientists from UMass, from university people, from federal agencies that are in these chapters. And they all, our research is being buried. Our freedom of speech is gone. We're lost. So I finally wrote the piece. And I got a hold of this guy named Barnaby Watton, who is the USGS Conti Lab supervisor. And I finally got to ask him some questions, and boy, did that embargo die over the weekend, and they published that article. So I'm laying claim to a few things, but this is not about me. It's really about the river. This is a river at the soul of anyone that lives in the Connecticut River Valley, from near Canada, Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Connecticut. Flush a toilet, take a drink of water, wash off some fruit, fertile soils. This is our river. This is why we are all here in this valley, because this fertile piece is here. Are we going to tolerate a full century of ecosystem destruction? I guess that's what I'm asking both of you folks in the audience, but National Marine Fisheries, Massachusetts Division of Fish and Wildlife, Energy and Environmental Services, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service right here in Hadley. So that's what I have to say. I'm going to take a drink of water if you want to shoot some questions on me. Sorry about the video, you people that are out there. But thank you, library folks, Will, Ty, people that came to see me, but wide open.
Who owns that part of the river? This company? owns
Great
it?
question. The
Is it
company-
by them and they pay the government money to be there, or?
Well, what we are offering them, it's our river, so it's a question of how much river are we going to let them have, right? They're not interested in fish. It's an algorithm for them. They're interested in the weight of water. Do they own it? They own a big chunk of river. This goes back to the building of the Turner's Falls Canal, the history of the canal and the building of Turner's Falls Dam in 1798. There were the canal that the 3 miles of canal that got river boats all the way up so that we could pillage and kill the forests all the way upstream in the Connecticut River. I think in 1804 was completed, and there was a small canal along the Holyoke Dam here that was built during George Washington's administration. So the investors in the Turner's Falls Canal were the Crocker Company. They're still around. They're big bankers. This was all done by bankers in Worcester and Boston. This was all sort of early robber baron stuff. And there was still something called the Nonotuck Company or whatever, but they owned this huge swath of river, all going all the way up from Northfield down to Turner's Falls. The riverbank is sort of there. They own much of that. They used to own all the Montague Plains. There's a whole recreation area. They bought up all this stuff. And then when it was a reasonably successful transportation canal until 1855, until the railroad sort of displaced it. But this was a banker's holiday. This was, it made money, and it's the legacy. And if you really want to go back in history, this is the legacy of the Turner's Falls Massacre. Land was given out in Falltown, which is Berniston, which is Gill, which is the northern part of Greenfield. About 60 years later, when the European migrants or the European conquerors or whatever you want to call us white guys were still around as grandparents or their families, they gave out when it was safe, when most of the native people either went to New York State or up towards Canada, they gave out land. They gave out land to the soldiers that took place in the massacre. And these were young men. Some of them were literally soldiers of fortune. Some of them were just young guys, full of juice. But this is what you do. This is how you conquer. And the legacy of that just sort of went on. This land was deeded out and it was bought up by, if you look at the history of it, it's the history of our country. And the Turner's Falls, what happened at Turner's Falls was a cultural genocide. Unfortunate. It's what happens in war, I guess. But it was sort of the blueprint of what just kept happening as we moved further west and further west into new watersheds, new rivers, new areas. And it even started before that with the conquest of the Pequot. And so I'm sort of getting out around this, but merchants bought up big swaths of river, and they stayed in play afterwards, and that's how you get to build a canal system. That's how you sort of get to build banks later, Crocker Bank, and still. So more, I could go anywhere with this, as you can see.
Well, I just got two more questions. Just a visual thing. You said the fish are taken up by these two things that are the size of buses.
Tubes. They're tunnels. They're like.
Do they get taken literally up or?
Yeah. Let me. Yeah. No. It's a good. If you go to my website, by the way, karlmeyerwriting.com or Karl Meyer blog, or you can go to Karl Meyer, River, you'll end up on my website. There's a young woman, Shayla Freeland, who wrote an opinion piece and also wrote to FERC. But she lives in Gill. She's 14 years old, and she just had a great understanding of the river. It's so complicated up there. And yet Northfield is so simple. It works like an electric toilet, right? You take electricity, you need a toilet tank, you need the top tank. Well, let's hack the top off a mountain. So you got 4 billion gallon, these tubes that are like, Callahan Tunnel, whatever. You could drive a bus up, 2 of them. So you can suck both at the same time, or you can throw it all at the same time, or you can do one or the other, because you got four giant turbines in the middle of the mountain. I've been in this thing. I was on the safety committee for a while, believe it or not. I don't know how I got pulled into it, but I learned plenty when I was up there. They take the juice off the grid, 20-mile lower reservoir. It's basically their cesspool. It's their flush sink, right? It's what they pillage to take the weight of water and put it up top. So at night, sometimes during the day, but most people don't ever see this, they take this massive amount of juice off the Connecticut, off the power grid, New England power grid, when it's cheap, or no, sometimes it costs nothing. I don't know if they always have to pay, but it is nothing. They pull the river up 15,000 cubic feet per second. As I said, picture 15,000 milk crates, or an 8-bedroom mansion every second for 60 seconds, and then an hour, then 4 hours, all the time. Everything that's in that river, no filtration, right through the turbines. If it's not dead on the way up, gets another trip on the way down when they sell it back to the power grid, and we pay for those high prices. Would the lights go out if Northfield Mountain wasn't running tomorrow? They would not. The big scam now, and this to me is the Greek tragedy of all tragedies, especially for people that are younger. They want to attach our Connecticut River, the life of this ecosystem that is still dead from Turner's Falls up through Vermont, New Hampshire. They want to attach it to 200-mile away turbines, right? Electric turbines that they want to put out off Martha's Vineyard and off the coast. They want to take those turbines. They want to take the fish that are growing, that come from the ocean to spawn back in our Connecticut River. So the fish that are literally going by these turbines, they want to take the electricity and they want to pull it back 200 miles to here, right? Suck our river backwards, kill the fish at the same time, and then produce the energy that's going to go back to the coast. It's going to go back to the coastal cities where it's needed. It's not, we're not a big energy driver here. I do have to give you some statistics, by the way. Thanks for this question. As far as Northfield Mountain goes, they for a while they were bragging about they actually produced the energy. They don't produce any energy. They've never produced a single watt of virgin energy, right? But they produced enough. They produced enough energy for 1.3 million homes. Is what they were saying in their advertising. They produce a year's worth of energy for 1.3 million homes. Well, if you take the not the built-in inefficiencies, they don't make any energy, but they lose a third more when they dump it back out, and some of it is useless anyway. They've already wasted, before they even put a watt out on the lines, the energy of 1.97 million homes. That is climate change in itself, right? If you're using sometimes 70% of what they've been using since Vermont Yankee went down in 2014 is natural gas. They're a climate change machine, okay? But okay, so in doing that 1.97 million homes that they're actually using energy for, that amounts to about the energy budget of 429,000 homes per year that is virtually wasted. And what that would, if you do a little math on that, and if you use the 2019 census for a single dwelling, which could be a trailer or a home or an apartment or whatever, they've literally wasted in a year's time in this BS advertising, all of the energy in Suffolk County, which is Boston, essentially. All that, so they could have heated and run the homes of all of Boston, Chelsea, Revere, and Winthrop. Okay, that's Suffolk County. Plus all of Hampshire County, that's, just to sort of bring it back here, that's 59,000 homes, and nearly all but about 10,000 homes in Franklin County, which is another 34. So they're literally squandering the planet to ruin a river here, and that's the future. But they have no contracts, they have nothing. But Massachusetts, we have made some pacts with the devil. We are nowhere near sort of meeting our own energy needs. Most of our energy is coming from the Midwest, from fossil fuels. That people are falling all over themselves. We are right now paying for a massive energy line to come down through Canada, through Maine. We are actually, they started building it, and it may not make it, but Massachusetts taxpayers, ratepayers, we're paying for that right now. We have no idea how the sausage is made. We have no insight. So I'm here to give you a little bit, but that's it. We are not. Energy should be consumed closest to where it is generated. There are ways to do things right. A killer machine in an ecosystem that was supposed to be restored 50 years ago, that is so entirely wasteful and disrespectful of the planet, has no business operating in Massachusetts, but Massachusetts is still where the Connecticut River is the deadliest, best landscape sewer in the nation. I will end with those great remarks. So, anybody else? Are we good? I'm happy to stay.
Yeah, I'll say something for just a minute.
Sure.
I can understand you being heartsick. I am the mother to a dam. And 20 years ago, it was just little me that was arguing it's Red Bridge over here on the Chickadee River.
Okay.
And there was no help from the Conservation Commission. There was no conversation with Fish and Wildlife. And what they had wanted to do was, in my backyard, my property pin goes to the dam, and 237 cubic feet a minute, they would just roll over the dam. And they wanted to increase the size of the turbines. So they wanted to cut a swath out of this 100-year-old dam so that it would drop down, and the velocity was both channeled and increased. And within that, I guess they had the authority. We were talking about, no one knows whether the water is up or the water is down. Within their request was to drop the Chickadee River by a foot. And because I walked back where the shallow ponds were, there would be frogs and the like that were in the side ponds, and they would lose water and die or get flooded. Turtles and frogs depend on a water's edge. I had no help. And I was, it was like my hands were behind my back. I can really understand her frustration. Anybody can, but yeah, I had a front row seat. And the other thing, so I told you my small situation. Who can we contact? How can we verbally participate?
If you go to my website right now, as I said, my website is really 11 years of trying to say the same thing a little bit differently each time. So are all my op-eds. And by the way, I don't get paid for any of this. I am, as I said, I'm a big fan of journalists and free press. But by freeing myself up and writing for free, I sort of have kept the confidence of editors. They trust me, but I don't have to go back and get the crap quote from the power company or the industrial, spokesperson, which these days is the only, it's half the time it's the only thing we hear. But if you go to my website and you go down through the latest posting, a couple There are suggestions about how you write to FERC. You can do e-comments. The other thing to do, and I recently had a piece, an opinion piece in the Mass Live in the Republican down here about not letting the river die in the dark. Go to the opinion pages. Go to the letters to the editor. Identify what's at stake here. But take a look at that blog. I try not to make it. Look at Shayla Freeland, 14-year-old person's thing. It doesn't have to be that complicated. She knows more about the river than most people I know, most grown-ups I know. And I don't know how, I think she got some of it from me, but you don't have to go that deep. We are owed a living river. It's the public's river. It's not, it's the river of the future. It's not even, it doesn't belong to us, and it certainly doesn't belong to some venture capital firm attached to the Treasury Board. Kind of write something, do something. But there are suggestions. But what seems to have immediate significance is to get something in the newspaper and maybe send those same remarks to FERC and your representative. But right now, the newspaper is the way to go, because we may be close to the end of this game on this December 1st, underground, back room, cigar smoking,
Are you optimistic?
I haven't been optimistic in a long time, but if I wasn't, I wouldn't do this. I long ago, I just feel like the river has given me so much. It's been a touchstone for me. It's been a place of solace, but the weight of its history, it's just become a part of me. And then I painted myself into this corner because nobody else was going to do this work. And I have nowhere else to go now. I will play the last card. So that's a tough question, but I think we owe young people all we can do. And this is a question of buying an ecosystem some time. And I think that's all that we should be doing right now is thinking of buying time for the planet and for those that come after us. So am I hopeful? I'm here. I drove 50 miles or so today. So, and I have a few more noises up my sleeve that I'm going to make before the 2nd of December. And then I'll say no more about that. But I'm appreciative that you guys came to hear me. And thanks, Ty, Will, the Wilbraham Library. Please subscribe to your local paper. It's important. When journalism dies, when there are news deserts, democracy goes right with it. So thanks. And thanks for the questions. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you for